A wounded war dog crawled to a Navy SEALs tent and cried what he found on its tag broke him. The Forward Elements tent line at Bagram was quiet at 2 in the morning in November of 2019, and Marcus Tran was awake because he was almost always awake at 2 in the morning on deployment, the specific hour when the noise of the base reduced to something manageable, and his mind, finally, had the quiet it needed to do its worst work. He heard the sound at the tent's entrance, before he saw what made it. Not a bark, not a whine, something lower and more exhausted than either. The sound of an animal that had been moving through pain for a long time and had found the first light it could reach and had decided that this was as far as it was going to go. He unzipped the tent. On the ground outside, a Belgian Malinois, black and tan, large, was lying on his side, with his back legs moving in the slow, diminishing way of an animal trying to complete a movement its body had nearly finished refusing. There was blood on his left flank, a gunshot wound, hours old, the dog's characteristic suppression of distress, meaning he had been carrying this through the dark for longer than he should have survived it. In the tense light, Marcus could see the dog's tags against his chest, the standard military working dog identification, and beside it, tied to the first tag with a short length of paracord, a second tag cut from a piece of aluminum, with small letters stamped into it by hand. Marcus read the tag in the tense light, and something in him stopped. Not visibly. He was a man who had trained himself not to show the things that stopped him, but in the way that certain things land in a person and don't move, ever, for the rest of their life. What Marcus Tran did next, and what he kept doing for the next 18 months until a day-over-day meeting room in San Jose finally gave a wounded war dog back to the man his handler had asked to keep him, is a story about what loyalty looks like when it travels across generations and across the Pacific and through the specific, grinding bureaucracy of a system that had good reasons for its rules and had never met Hung Nguyen. Stay with us, one. Subscribe before we go further. This is what this channel does. Marcus had done 15 years with Naval Special Warfare and was 40 years old in the November of 2019 and was, without knowing it yet, 4 months from the end of his operational career. He had grown up in San Diego, the son of Ben Tran, who had been a lieutenant in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam before the fall of Saigon in 1975, and who had spent 11 months in a re-education camp afterward and had arrived in California in 1979 with a wife and nothing else, and had rebuilt his life with the specific unhurried competence of a man who understood that the alternative to rebuilding was not acceptable. Ben had become an electrician. He had raised Marcus in the specific ethic of a man who had served a country and lost it and then been given a second country and was going to love it with everything he had, including the son he raised in it. Marcus had enlisted at 22, partly because of his father, and partly because he had always been the kind of person who moved toward the thing that required the most of him. And the Navy had provided 15 consecutive years of things that required the most of him. He had been at Bagram for 6 weeks. He was not supposed to be anywhere near the tent line at 2 in the morning. He had a bunk, a sleeping schedule that he managed with the precision he applied to everything. But 2 in the morning was when the quiet arrived and when he used it, sitting on a folding chair outside the tent with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. And the specific contained solitude of a man who had learned to need this particular hour. The dog's name on the standard tag was Sergeant Rex. His handler's name and unit were on the same tag, SP4 Daniel Nguyen, 10th SFSG, K9 unit. The handmade aluminum tag, tied on with paracord, said, "If something happens to me, call my father." And below it, a phone number with a 408 area code, which Marcus recognized as San Jose, and a name, Hung Nguyen. Marcus looked at this for a long time. He looked at the dog, who was looking at him with the dark, specific attention of an animal who had traveled a long way through the dark and had arrived somewhere and was waiting to find out if it had been the right somewhere. Marcus put his hand on the dog's side and felt the breathing, shallow, fast, real. He called the base medic. Then, when the medic was working on Rex's flank and Marcus was holding the dog's head still, and the dog was not making any sound because it had passed through the part of pain where sound was a response and was now just enduring, Marcus picked up his personal phone and looked at the number on the aluminum tag and called it. It was 2 in the morning in Afghanistan. It was 10 in the morning in San Jose. The phone rang twice. Hung Nguyen said, "Yes, yes." The voice of a man who had been waiting to answer a specific call and had known, when the international number appeared, that the call had come. Marcus said his name and his unit. He said he was at Bagram and that he had Danny's dog. He said he was sorry. He said the dog was being treated and was going to be okay. He said these things in order, because order was what this moment required, and because Hung deserved to know the things that were survivable before he was given the thing that was not. Hung was silent for a long time after Marcus finished. Then he said, in English that was precise and careful in the specific way of a man for whom English had been his second language for 40 years, and who had never stopped treating it with the respect of something that had been. Hard one. His dog is alive. Marcus said yes. Hung said, Danny always said if anything happened, Rex should come to me. He did not know yet how hard that was going to be. But he had said it, and Marcus Tran did not say things he did not mean and then not do them. Have you ever made a promise in a moment of loss that you didn't fully understand the cost of yet, and then kept it anyway? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. I think the people who've been there know something important about what it means to mean what you say. Hung Nguyen had come to the United States from Saigon in 1980, 5 years after the fall, which meant 5 years in the specific suspended state of a man waiting to see what was going to be left of the life he had built before everything changed. He had been a captain in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, the 22nd Infantry Division, 3rd Company, a man who had fought at Dak To in 1972 with the specific, unhurried competence of a soldier who understood that competence was the best protection available, and who had come home from that battle and had then watched the thing he had fought for end on a Tuesday in April of 1975 while he was standing in a street in Saigon with no particular plan for what to do next. He had spent 3 years after the fall managing the specific calculus of survival, what to say to the new authorities, what to not say, how to be exactly ordinary enough not to be noticed and exactly compliant enough not to be removed, before he found a way to the refugee camps in Malaysia and then to California, where he had arrived at 42 with his wife Mai and a shoulder bag and the particular quality of a man who understood that everything he was going to build from this point forward was going to be built from scratch, and that this was not a tragedy, it was an instruction. He had worked in a restaurant kitchen for 3 years, then at a cannery in Santa Clara for 4 years, then had driven a delivery truck for 11 years and saved money with the methodical patience of a man who had learned in a re-education camp that patience was a skill and not a surrender. And he had bought the small house in San Jose's east side where he had lived for 29 years. The backyard garden had been his wife's idea and had become his practice. Tomatoes and bitter melon and rau muong and the herbs that made food taste like the place they were both from. The specific alchemy of growing something in American soil that tasted like Vietnamese memory. The small altar in the living room held photographs of Mai, who had died in 2016, kidney disease, 14 months from diagnosis, in the specific unfair way that good people sometimes died. And Danny in his army uniform, and Hung in his Arvin uniform from 1971, and a small bronze Buddha that Mai had carried in the shoulder bag from Saigon in 1980, and that Hung had not moved since she died. Danny had been born in that house in 1995, the second child, and had grown up in it with the knowledge of a child who understood, without being told explicitly, that his parents had survived something large and that the life they had given him was built on that survival and should be treated accordingly. He had been a quiet, methodical kid with a talent for animals. The neighbor's dog always came to him. The stray cats of the east side knew which yard to go to, and who had, at 17, told his father that he wanted to serve in the army. Hung had looked at his son for a long time, and had thought about the Arvin and the fall, and the years after, and then he had said he was proud of him, and that he should do it well, and that he should come home. Danny had said he would try. They both knew that trying was the honest answer. Danny had met Sergeant Rex in the last week of his K-9 handler certification, a bond that formed in the first 48 hours and that deepened across 3 years of work in the specific way that handler-dog bonds deepened, through repetition, through the accumulation of trust that came from doing a hard thing together and finding that the other party was reliable under conditions that tested reliability. Rex had been Danny's operational partner, and Danny had been Rex's person, and the language between them was the language of two animals who had agreed on the terms of their relationship completely. Danny had filed the adoption paperwork 14 months before he died, on a Tuesday afternoon in September when the paperwork office was quiet, with the specific, practical foresight of a person who had thought carefully about his own mortality and was not going to leave this particular thing to chance. The paper was correct. It was complete. It was in a queue. The paper was in a queue. Marcus rotated home 4 months after the night Rex crawled to his tent. His left hand wrapped in the bandaging that covered the 3 fingers. He would not get back after the shrapnel from a roadside IED found them on a February morning on a road outside Parwin. He was medically retired in June of 2020, and he moved back to San Diego, and he called Hung Nguyen once a month, because Hung was the father of a man who had died carrying a phone number for his father, and that made him Marcus's responsibility in the specific way that certain things became specific people's responsibilities without anyone deciding it. He found out about Rex's status on a Thursday in November of 2020, 18 months after Bagram, because he called Hung that morning, and Hung told him, in the careful voice Hung used for things he had been turning over for a while, that he had received a letter from the Army saying that Rex had been assigned to a new handler at Fort Bragg 3 weeks ago, and that the adoption paperwork filed by Danny had been delayed in processing. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then he asked Hung to send him the letter. He read it that afternoon. Danny had filed the paperwork 14 months before he died. The paperwork was correct and complete. It had been sitting in a queue for 16 months and had been passed over by the reassignment because the queue moved slower than the pipeline. Rex had a new handler. The new handler had had him for 3 weeks. The 60-day reversal window ran from the assignment date. They were 41 days in. Marcus had 19 days. He called Congresswoman Elena Reyes's office in San Jose. He got her district director on the 3rd try. He explained what he had in 2 minutes and 40 seconds, which was how long it took a man who had briefed special operations commanders to explain a situation that required action. The district director said she would call him back. She called back in 4 hours. She said the congresswoman would like to speak with him. He spoke with the congresswoman that evening. She said she had a constituent named Hung Nguyen and that she had been to his house for 3 Tet celebrations and that she was going to make a call to the day-over-day MWD program office in the morning. 11 days later, a colonel named Thomas Harris from the day-over-day military working dog program sat down across a conference table in the San Jose VA office's meeting room. He was 53, precise, a career officer who had managed the MWD program for 6 years and who believed, sincerely, that the program's procedures existed for good reasons and were applied consistently and fairly, and that the paperwork backlog was a resource problem and not a moral failing. He had not met Hung Nguyen before this meeting. Hung was at the table. Marcus was at the table with Luna, his German Shepherd service dog. At his left side, Congresswoman Reyes was at the table. Colonel Harris had a legal pad and a prepared summary of Rex's reassignment status. He explained the procedure. He explained the queue. He explained the reassignment timeline and the logistical considerations of disrupting a handler-dog bond after 3 weeks of formation. He said this with genuine professionalism and genuine regret, and the specific tone of a man who understood that the outcome was not good, but that the procedure had been followed. Luna rose from the floor. She moved without command to a position between Hung and the colonel, and the low, continuous growl started. Not alarm, not aggression exactly. The specific sound of a dog who had been watching the room and had completed her read of it and was communicating the result. Colonel Harris looked at the dog and then at Marcus, who looked back at him without expression. Hung said it in the quiet of a man who had been patient with systems his entire life, with the Arvin bureaucracy and the refugee camp bureaucracy and the INS bureaucracy and the DMV bureaucracy and 30 years of American systems that he had navigated with the thoroughness of someone who knew that systems were not going to change for him and that he had to learn their shape and work within it. He had been patient with all of them. This was the one thing he was not going to be patient about. My son filed the paper before he died. The room was still. Colonel Harris looked at the legal pad. He looked at Hung. He looked at Marcus, who reached into his jacket pocket and placed the aluminum tag on the table. The handmade tag cut from a soda can, the letters stamped by hand, the paracord still attached. If something happens to me, call my father. He said Danny made that tag himself. He knew what he was asking for. He asked 14 months before he died. which was 14 months of certainty that Rex should go to this man if he didn't come home. He said it in the same level voice he used for everything. Not for effect, not with heat, just with the precision of a statement that did not require embellishment. The paper was filed. The paper was correct. The paper was not processed. That is a distinction that matters. Congresswoman Reyes said that her office would be following the outcome of this meeting very closely, and that she had a prepared statement for the next Armed Services Committee hearing that she was prepared to not use if the matter was resolved today. Colonel Harris sat with the aluminum tag on the table in front of him. He picked up his phone. Rex came to San Jose 14 days later. The transfer was classified as a compassionate reassignment, which was a category that existed in the MWD program for exactly this kind of situation, and which had simply not been applied because nobody had applied it until Congresswoman Reyes' office filed a formal inquiry. The process, once unlocked, moved quickly, which was how these processes went when the right person asked the right question of the right system in the right way, which was something Marcus had learned in 15 years of working inside large organizations that moved slowly and sometimes moved fast when they had to. The corporal at Fort Bragg named Watts, who had had Rex for 31 days, sent a letter to Hung with the dog that Marcus read over Hung's shoulder at the kitchen table in San Jose. It was handwritten on notebook paper, 2 paragraphs from a young man who understood what he was giving up and had decided that giving it up was the right thing. It said, "I could tell from the first day he was waiting for someone. I hope he finds whoever it is." It said, "He's a good dog. Take care of him." Hung read the letter twice. He folded it carefully along its original creases and put it in the box beside the altar, where he kept Danny's letters, which was in the living room under the photograph of Danny in his army uniform. And he did not say anything for a moment. And Marcus did not say anything either, which was the correct response. On the day Rex arrived, Marcus drove up from San Diego and sat in Hung's backyard garden in the November afternoon while the old man sat on the ground in the winter grass with Rex in his lap. All 42 pounds of Belgian Malinois draped across Hung Nguyen's knees with his head against the old man's chest and his eyes closed. Hung's hands were on the dog's back, the same hands that had built a garden from American soil, that had carried a shoulder bag across the Pacific, that had signed papers in refugee camps and DMV offices, and the naturalization ceremony in 1987, resting on the dog that had been the last living thing connected to his son. Luna sat beside Marcus on the dormant winter grass and watched this with the still, patient attention of a working dog in a room that did not require her to work. And Marcus let the afternoon be what it was. He had found Danny's business plan notebook in a cardboard box of miscellaneous bunk items that had been handed to him in Bagram because he was the senior element, and somebody had to go through the boxes. The notebook had a spiral binding and a cover that said composition in block letters, and inside it was a complete, methodical, entirely serious plan for a Vietnamese sandwich shop. Banh mi, specifically, the bread sourced from a supplier in San Jose, the pork prepared from his mother's recipe that he had copied in full in the notebook, the location identified as a commercial space 2 blocks from his father's house that had been empty for a year, the projected opening date of March 2021, the savings totals and the monthly projections, and a note at the end that said, "Tell Bodo I have enough saved. He doesn't need to put in anything." Marcus had read the notebook twice in Bagram and had mailed it to Hung in a padded envelope, without a letter, because no letter he could write would have added anything to what the notebook already said. He had received a text from Hung 3 weeks later that said, "Thank you. 2 words. Sufficient." Hung opened his eyes. He looked at Rex. He said in the specific, unhurried way he said things that he had been holding for a long time and was now ready to say, "His grandfather and your father served in the same regiment. Did you know that?" Marcus said he had found out the night he called. Hung said, "I thought so." He said it with the small, specific satisfaction of a man who had always suspected that certain things were connected and had been waiting patiently for the moment when the connection became visible. He said, "Your father was in Bien Hoa in 72. Marcus said, "Dak To." Hung said, "Dak To." He nodded once, the nod of confirmation. "My company was at Tan Shan. Same battle, different road." He looked at his hands on the dog's back. He said, "Different road." They sat in the garden for another hour until the November light had gone off the tomato stakes and the bitter melon vines that had gone brown for winter, and Hung made tea inside and brought it out in 2 cups, and they drank it in the cold, and Rex moved from Hung's lap to the space between both of them and put his head on Marcus's knee, and Marcus put his hand on the dog's head, and that was enough. The dog had crawled through the dark to the nearest light. Marcus had been that light without knowing it, and had carried what the dog brought him all the way home. He had been holding the aluminum tag in his jacket pocket for 18 months, through the hospital, through the retirement, through 14 months of phone calls to Hung, and 1 congressional inquiry, and 19 days of urgency, and a conference table in a VA meeting room. He had not put it down. He did not think he was going to put it down. Some things you carry not because you have to, but because the carrying was asked of you by someone who understood that you were the right person for it, and you did not put those things down. This story is for every handler and every dog who served in places where the ground was dangerous and the work was necessary, and for every father who filed the paperwork before he went and trusted that the paper would find its way. Is there someone in your life whose request you are still carrying? Something they asked of you before they couldn't ask anymore? Tell me about them in the comments. I read every one. This section deserves their names. Every story on this channel is about choosing not to look away, and sometimes about carrying something 17,000 miles because a dog trusted you enough to crawl to your light. Subscribe if that means something to you. There are more stories to tell. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.